Thank you, John, for joining us today. We're really excited about having you here today.
Great to be here.
We're excited to get started, but first, just a few little housekeeping tips to ensure the best quality for our audience. We've actually muted everybody's phones. This doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. In fact, we're excited to hear your thoughts. Please use the question section of your tool and GoToWebinar. As you guys are probably familiar, there's a little tool that pops up. There's a section that has questions. We will be holding those off until the end of the presentation, but please make sure that you put those in as we go. I want to make sure that we have as much conversation as possible. If you're having trouble with the audio, you can dial in using the details shown on the screen or listen to through the speakers on your computer. I'm going to be kind of watching to see if there's any concerns or comments. So if you do have any concerns or questions, just put in the questions. I'll try to address those as well, so we get the best experience for everybody on the phone today. Once again, for those joining us, my name is Adam Shiflett, and we're actually going to have John do our presentation for DRIVIN here. You might be wondering who is DRIVIN. Think of terms of extension of your inventory team. They provide dealers access to untapped used vehicle inventory nationwide pre-auction. Have aged inventory, you can give them your wholesale price, and they'll work to help you eliminate it. Arming partners with the data and vehicle recommendations to make quick confidence decisions. DRIVIN handles acquisition, paperwork, and transport, all that good stuff. All this so you can spend more time on the sales floor and less time researching and inventory and all those things that you have to do to get the car sold, but not the car sale itself. So their expertise inspired our conversation today. So we wanted to kind of work with DRIVIN because they have so much expertise in here. As we strategize around how to increase turn to data and help us make difficult inventory decisions. How many times have you thought, I know this happens all the time, I can't sell that car unless I make X dollars on it, or I'll hold that car as long as it takes to sell. So we're going to talk about those. The idea of taking a hit or having a vehicle look like a failure keeps many dealers holding on to sales inventory when in reality, this is what could be putting you behind. Interestingly enough, I just came from a 20 group where we had this exact conversation of when it is okay to let go. So today we'll discuss recognizing and overcoming loss aversion, eliminating and acquiring the right vehicles, data points to consider when optimizing your lot, and resources to simplify inventory management. Wow, with all that said, we only have 45 minutes, so we got to get going. So John, please go. Let's get kicked off here.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for the good intro, and thank you for everybody for taking the time today to join us on the webinar. I promise it'll be an interesting conversation with hopefully some really good takeaway points you can bring back in-house. So I'd like to start off the webinar by playing a game, albeit a pretty morbid one. And while the situation is hypothetical, we need to think through it and try to answer it honestly, and we're going to take a poll here after we run through the scenario. So think about the potential outcome of each of these choices. So imagine that the U.S. is preparing for an outbreak of an unusual disease, which is expected to kill 600 people. Now, 2 alternative programs to combat the disease have been proposed. Assume that the exact scientific estimate of the consequences of the programs are as follows. Program A is adopted, 200 people will be saved, for sure, 100% certainty. If Program B is adopted, there's a 1 in 3 chance that 600 people will be saved, so everybody lives, and a 2/3 probability that nobody will be saved. So if we think about this for a second and jump into a poll, if you were presented with each of these program options and you thought about the consequences between them, which one would you choose? And again, this is obviously very hypothetical and hopefully no one has to be in the situation, but if you were presented with this with lives at stake, which of these 2 options would you choose?
Now I have to ask before we close out the poll, and people are starting to answer right now while we're waiting for them to answer, which zombie apocalypse show inspired this question today?
I wish I could take credit for it, but I'll actually get into the history of where this question came from. It's actually from the late 70s and early 80s. But I'm sure it spawned some zombie apocalypse screenplays soon after it was given.
Excellent. All right, I'm gonna actually go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we've got most people actually voted. So I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll and put that in front of everybody.
Okay, so we got some gamblers here. We're going big on it. So 1/3 said 200 people for sure, and 2/3 of the folks said we're going to go for it all. Interesting. That's actually really interesting. So thank you for that. Jumping ahead to the presentation again, I promised I would provide a little bit of background of where that came from. And it actually came from two men named Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And they helped develop some of the most influential theories in the history of behavioral economics. They were some trailblazers early on, like I said, throughout the 70s and 80s that kind of formed this new way of thinking of behavioral economics. One of their primary focuses centered around decision making, and more specifically how we as humans can make irrational decisions based on our own personal biases. So all of us do this. We contradict ourselves when we make quick or deliberate decisions. We have things like cognitive biases that kind of make us shift our position on a very similar subject depending on the situation. So as a result of his work, Kahneman actually received the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. And one of the foundational findings that led to this award was his work on prospect theory, and more specifically, a piece called loss aversion. And today I want to start the webinar by tying loss aversion to the car dealer's decision-making process as it relates to inventory management. And as we progress through the webinar, I will then move towards additional biases identified by Kahneman and his team as he further developed his findings, and again, their relative effects on dealership successes. And then we'll close out with the DRIVIN methodology, a data-driven approach that complements dealerships' experiences in order to form a better process for optimizing your inventory. So really, we're trying to marry some art and science today on the webinar and learn from some of these lessons and tie it into the auto industry. So if we want to jump back into our hypothetical scenario, imagine again for our second poll that a new scientist comes up and says, actually, I have two different programs. I have program C and program D to choose from. If program C is adopted, 400 people are going to die. And if program D is adopted, there's a 1/3 probability that no one will die and a 2/3 probability that 600 people will die. So in this scenario, when the scientist comes to your office and presents these findings, again, you're put forward with a choice. And if we can have a poll, to have the same kind of decision process come up with these two programs, just C and D by themselves, as these programs are laid out, which one?
So it looks like we're getting some people rolling in here. Like I said, it'd be interesting to see how many shows this study actually inspired. I'm sure all of the zombies
exactly.
are kind of wondering which one was picked here. So, all right, I'll go ahead and close this poll and pull it up in front of everybody again.
All right, got some gamblers again. So this is actually really interesting. I'm glad that the poll went this way, because in terms of what happened with Kahneman and Tversky, there was actually a different outcome for them. They actually had people take these polls. If we jump into the full screen of the next one that shows program A and program B, when this original question was asked, almost everybody chose program A. 72% of the folks that took this said, I want to take the sure thing. I want to save those people's lives for sure. 200 out of 600, that's good to go. And then when they were asked the second question, they ended up contradicting themselves, and you guys on the phone didn't, which is great. So if you chose A and D, you actually were biased. You actually changed your mind based on the phrasing of the question. Program A and program C had the exact same outcome. 200 people will be saved. That means 400 people will die. The exact outcome has no difference. Same with program C and program D. So if you chose B and D, great. If you chose A and C, great. But if you chose A and D or B and C, you actually fell victim to a bias. So again, I think that's really cool that you guys actually remain consistent, and how that kind of relates to what we're talking about today, the topic of hand. What does this have to do with car dealerships or the automotive industry? So when dealers source used inventory from auctions, trade-ins, or other avenues, they need to start thinking about how the goals of maximizing potential profit from the transaction shifts as the vehicle continues to age on their lot. So when looking at a vehicle run through an auction lane, or you're making an appraisal on the vehicle from trade-in, the dealer is using years of experience in the industry, availability of that inventory in their market, forecasted data from various software tools to make a go or no-go decision. And in an auction especially, the clock is ticking, and you're watching other bidders competing real-time for that VIN, both of which can cause behavior to alter simply by adding that time constraint as well as the competition. So regardless, the end goal is the same. You're making a prediction on what vehicles will bring a profit to the dealership during a near-term time span with an uncertain future. So for sports fans out there, you may recall certain athletes saying they really hate losing more than they love winning. Really heartbreaking losses stick with people more than championships do at a high level. And a lot of this holds true with many dealer partners we've spoken with over the years. You know, ideally, we'd all like to bat 1,000 and every car we source ends up being a winner, but that isn't reality. So the first major point of the webinar is this: when it's time to shed inventory that isn't selling, the dealer must flip the line of thinking from maximizing profit to minimizing loss. So the decision-making framework requires dealers to answer questions such as, what happens if I sell now? You know, what do I lose? And then compare that scenario to, what is the risk of keeping this inventory and incurring additional losses? What do I lose by passing up the opportunity to sell today? Now, it's hard to make this adjustment. You know, we bet on a VIN to succeed, and we're now shifting the mentality that, in fact, we need to get out of this vehicle to find a better option. And this type of decision needs to be as objective as possible, which is very difficult. And understanding the biases we have caused by loss aversion can help us make that objective decision. So leadership within the dealership needs to shift its focus away from reprimanding buyers and used car managers for not making money on every vehicle, but rather encouraging them to make sound decisions to get out of vehicles that aren't moving. And arming your team with the best data to stock the right vehicles for your used lot is imperative and will always lead to better long-term results. Before we continue, there's actually a really interesting quote. A gentleman named Peter Thiel, who is the co-founder of PayPal and a very active startup investor, has a quasi-famous interview question that he likes to ask. It says, "Tell me something that's true that almost nobody agrees with you on." I wanted to share my answer with you guys, which is we shouldn't judge decisions based on their outcomes. And when you hear that, it sounds really counterintuitive. It definitely did to me when I first heard that. I believe I even kind of smirked and laughed when I heard it. But I feel that this really gets to the heart of loss aversion, how GMs, dealer principals, folks within the dealership wrongfully react to VINs that weren't profitable by punishing the buyer or used car manager for not making money on the vehicle. Rather, the process as a whole should be reviewed up to that point the decision was made. Was the process sound regardless of the outcome? Did we get into a car that we should have never bid on in the first place, and now we're trying to get out of it the right way? Or did we make a solid decision that came up short? So this is something that's actually shifting to our first bias outside of loss aversion, called the outcome bias. And another hypothetical situation, another game for us to play, but instead of betting on people's lives, let's use money. So I'm going to roll a standard 6-sided die, and if it comes up 1 or 6, you give me 20 bucks. Any other number that comes up, I'll give you 20 bucks. So of course you take this bet. If I say that to you, you're going to have twice the chances of winning as I am. So you have 4 numbers, I have 2, and assuming the die isn't loaded, you're going to bankrupt me. You're going to take all my money if we play this game until one of us just loses everything. So we roll the die the first time, and sure enough, a 6 comes up. You lose, I win, you owe me 20 bucks. So does that mean you made a poor bet? No, of course not. The outcome didn't go your way, but the decision was the right one. And in the future, you would make that bet every time. Now, a vehicle can be primed to sell for all the right reasons. You can make the correct purchasing decision, but sometimes the VIN just misses. The opposite can also take place where luck is on your side, and you stock a vehicle you shouldn't have stocked, yet it sold quickly and profitably. So suddenly you have the desire to repeat that win, even though the odds are against you. In our example before, I took my $20 and I might just double down and say, let's roll the die again, and that would be a stupid bet on my part. You know, eventually I would be doomed. So it's imperative to focus on the process of making that stocking decision and not focus on the individual outcomes. Not every VIN you stock is going to be a home run. Sometimes you'll strike out, but as long as the process of procuring that VIN, pricing it effectively, and making it a good part of your inventory is sound, you want to continue down that path. we want to jump into the second bias that was related to loss aversion, which is called the recency bias. So earlier this year, I met with a team of used car managers and GMs from a really large dealer group in the Midwest. And one of the sales leaders offered a great example when he had his guys around the table. He said, I want to get out of the habit of selling a car, making a good spread on it, then running out to buy 4 or 5 more of that car to repeat its success. This is a perfect example of how dangerous an outcome could be when you're falling victim to recency bias. So recency bias basically boils down to a line of thinking that believes whatever's happening now will continue to happen for the foreseeable future. The stock market is a very prime example of recency bias and how people can ride a winning thing a little too long. So recency bias is dangerous for dealers because so much can happen in the market between the time that VIN was stocked and sold. The old adage, the only constant is change, rings true here. So I'd advise before deciding that you need to go ahead and repeat that last win by restocking the same type of vehicle, reassess your market, take a look at your customer data, and decide if that's still the right decision to make at this point in time. So if that decision, outcome of the VIN is wrong, some dealers can fall victim to the next bias, which is negativity bias. So I was on a dealer visit with one of our account execs, and she was running through a certain type of MMYT to one of our dealers, a vehicle that we were pitching to him. Said, look, we think there's a demand shortage for this type of vehicle in your marketplace. Based on our data, you should be a prime candidate to move this type of off-brand vehicle. So they're a franchise dealer, we were recommending an off-brand used car. And unfortunately, the response we got was, I bought one of those 4 years ago, and I really got burned. And as a result of that, I'll never stock that brand again. I absolutely refuse to even look at the car. So negativity bias falls under the loss aversion umbrella, as we've talked about before. And when we experience events with negative outcomes, they actually have a more profound effect on our psychological processes than positive events. So some research even claims the impact of a loss can be more than twice as impactful as the impact of a win or gain. Those negative reactions, those wins, those losses, those bad experiences have a bigger impact on us than the good experiences. So this is an example of having a bad experience that's just lingering around and actually causing more issues for the dealership. So hanging on to a bad experience with a certain type of vehicle for years will lessen the number of opportunities you have to succeed in stocking and selling a used vehicle. You're wrongfully cutting out an entire brand of potential VINs based on outdated experiences and data. So finally, I'd like to jump into the last bias we'll talk about before getting into the data side. And this is one of the touchier ones to address, and it's called overconfidence bias. And it's especially true when engaging with subject matter experts or veterans of an industry. Many of the most important decision makers within a dealership are seasoned veterans. They're men and women who have spent years learning the ins and outs of their dealerships, their markets, and their customers. Experience can be a great teacher, but a potential side effect of more experience is a narrower focus on what is possible, what information is available now, and how we can use it to improve our status quo. So when speaking with dealer partners about a data-driven approach to marry up to their experience in order to help identify used vehicles and explaining why and how we come to these conclusions, we sometimes hear folks say, you know, I buy based on my gut and it's been working well for me so far. Or I've been doing this for 20 or 30 years, I know what sells, I know what I'm good at selling. Now these should not be viewed as competing positions, as I said before. At the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned about marrying art and science. So rather, these are complementary skill sets. You can strengthen your performance by adding data to your experience and expanding your decision-making arsenal. Now, I'm not suggesting you ignore lessons learned based on experience. Whatever we have learned as a result of experience should constantly be challenged to ensure our knowledge is still relevant and understand how we can improve. The overconfidence effect is a barrier to growth, and falling victim to that bias can let your competition leapfrog your performance. If it ain't broke, don't fix it is one of the deadliest phrases I believe a leader can say. That phrase is on the epitaph of many tombstones of failed businesses and industries. So before we jump into the next steps part of the webinar, I actually recently read an article Dale Pollock posted on his website, which I thought was really appropriate for the discussion we have in our webinar. And the article is titled 3 Reasons a Chief Complaint About Auction Purchases Fall Flat. And I wanted to read the third point now. I get so impatient and tired of losing cars, I just buy them. So goes the reaction of many dealers and used vehicle managers to today's auction buying experience. The problem, of course, is this frame of mind often results in paying too much for auction vehicles. The key? Sticking to your guns, even if it causes anxiety and heartburn. The fact is, used vehicle margins in today's market are too thin to let emotions cloud a good investment decision. In addition, it's important that dealers recognize there are, in fact, perfectly good reasons to seemingly pay too much for a particular car. So when I read that, and when Dale says sticking to your guns, even if it causes anxiety and heartburn, I immediately thought and tied this back to our previous topic of following the process and not the results. The game plan you lay out is more important aspect of inventory management, and it isn't universal for each dealer. So for next steps, let's get to the so what part of the webinar. We've gone through some of the key findings from Daniel Kahneman, and if you're interested in reading more about that, he has an amazing book called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a bit of a slow read if you're not into the kind of scientific nonfiction, but it is incredibly impactful and relatable to many industries, automotive especially, in my opinion. So we're now aware of biases, how they can cloud our decision-making process. So what do we do now? We self-assess our current lot makeups and look for ways to improve. Over 2016, I've spoken at various conferences and webinars about DRIVIN's optimal lot methodology, our own internal process for helping dealer partners make better to use inventory decisions based on the combination of data and experience of the inventory selection process. Today, I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, which include data points to consider when building out your used vehicle inventory. So at the very core, you're talking about 3 pillars. And the 3 pillars for the optimal lot are going to be targeting the right audience, establishing your market position, and finally selecting the right inventory. And yes, those are in sequential order. Many dealerships that run into issues jump right to pillar 3, and that's what selection of inventory when it's not weighed properly with what they know about their target customers and their market position. So the Cliff Notes version of the collecting the right audience gets into something called customer segmentation, which is actually a really big emphasis on many retail industries out in the market. So figuring out who your most profitable customers are, what they want, and how to align your strategy to really win them over. So the Cliff Notes version of this is really coming down to 3 types of data points you want to collect on car shoppers that come through your dealership. At the highest level, demographic information is one of the most traditional and easy to collect data types in the industry. These are things like age, education, income, family size, and even geography is a subset of demographic data. So how far do shoppers drive to visit your dealership and buy specific types of cars? And we'll get into an example of that in the next slide. So going one level deeper than demographic data is something called psychographic data. And this is really getting down to interests, activities, and hobbies that some of the buyers have. If they're outdoors folks, if they go on lots of family road trips, things like that, personality traits. And even, I know millennials have been a big talking point at conferences and webinars and looking at and understanding how to market and sell to these folks and how different they are than a lot of traditional buyers. And that gets down to the psychographic level of detail, as well as our final level, which is behavioral. So behavioral characteristics are like, how much do the buyers like to negotiate when buying? Do they like to have an agreed upon price before they ever step on your lot? Or are they looking to come in and have a consultative experience where someone helps them actually select a car that they don't really haven't decided upon yet? What online tools do they use? What apps do they use when they shop? How mobile integrated are they? And what's their preferred communication path with you, the dealer? So within the dealership, there are different ways to capture this. I've seen folks use CRM tools. I've seen folks use DMS. I've seen folks and even help people set up Excel spreadsheet templates. It's really just that easy to do. When shoppers come in, these are the types of data points you want to collect on them outside of things like their credit score and age and credit worthiness, which is demographic, but really dig in and see if there's certain types of psychographic shoppers or behavioral characteristics that overlap many of your buyers that you can hone in on. So I wanted to give an example again of how geography plays into the decision-making process. So if we understand true market reach, we'll go into the next actually a different dealer group that I went into, and we took a look at their data. I actually asked them to give me 2 years worth of retail sales data, and we took Q4 of last year for a franchise dealership in the Midwest and said, let's take a look at how far folks travel to the dealership to purchase cars. And this guy uses a very popular pricing tool to help price his inventory. And when we look at VINs, I'd watch him expand his radius. So you start at 50 miles, go to 100, 200, and just keep expanding out until there was a sample size that he felt was large enough to make a pricing decision on that VIN. And so I said, do you feel that expanding to 200 miles to set your price is really pricing based on what's available in the market? And he said, absolutely. This is the way I use the tool. This is the way I do it. I need to see how other people are pricing the inventory so I can price it relative to them. So my counter argument was if people really aren't driving 200 miles to your dealership, you're really not pricing to your market. So we took that DMS data and we laid it out and I said, how far do you think people are really driving? And if we look at the results on the bar, over half of the folks that purchased on-brand vehicles for him were within 10 miles. You can see just how quickly these bars drop the further away we get from his dealership. And when he was talking about folks traveling 200 miles, more than 100 miles, it's 5% of all his sales for that entire quarter. It was pretty eye-opening. And again, this is easily available data to you guys. You can easily do this with Google Maps. And we have a step-by-step instruction booklet on our website that shows you how to do this. And it's actually a pretty powerful exercise. So again, when you're using tools, when you're understanding market reach and you're doing a price-to-market strategy, you really need to define your market first. And you need to use objective data like we do for the optimal lot to say, where are our shoppers coming from? And when you dig into the consumer behavior pieces, the data points we talked about on the previous slide, okay, the folks that are traveling 50 miles or more, how are they different than the folks that are traveling within 10 to 25 miles? Why are the folks that are traveling beyond 25 miles coming here? Do we have a rare type of vehicle that's just hard to find that we have the strength to sell? You can also see competitive information of beyond 50 miles. At this point, 50 miles out, is there another on-brand dealer that has a really strong marketplace position there? And that's why folks aren't traveling as far. Is there an independent dealer? If you're an independent dealer, are you able to steal customers from other franchise dealers? Or if you're a franchise dealer, are there folks that are stocking your brand that are taking your customers away? And when you see a pretty precipitous drop-off like this, you want to start looking for where those other dealerships are and understanding the type of inventory they're stocking. So talk about competition in the marketplace that affects your market reach. We talked about the different customers that come into your dealership. Those are the first two pieces of the optimal lot. And the final piece is actually selecting your inventory. And this is really a strategic discussion that starts within the dealership. And it's a solution that really requires a ton of time and effort and alignment across all parts of the dealership. And there are consultative companies like DRIVIN, which are happy to help do this. There are plenty of tools out there in the marketplace where you can view inventory and look to find vehicles that match what your optimal lot makeup is. And we actually have a pretty cool surprise today. We have something called Marketplace, which is releasing in October. And it's actually a platform that DRIVIN has built, and we're going to help dig into it here in a second. This is actually a clickable mock-up that our design and product teams inside DRIVIN has made. So not quite live on our site. We have a couple dealerships that are in beta right now running through it. And I just wanted to take you guys through it today, show you what it looks like, and help you kind of understand how we use the data and analytics piece within DRIVIN to put it on an actual product marketplace. So we're just going to quickly pull that up here. I can just give you guys a very quick run through, and this is going to be launching in mid-October. When signing in, it's really simple. There's basically three pieces to the process when selecting the right inventory. We talked about assessing your current lot. And when we assess our current lot, we look at vehicles we think we might want to get rid of and shed to wholesale. And what DRIVIN actually does is looks at vehicles on your lot, and we rank order them not just by age, but other variable factors such as a large amount of a certain type of vehicle in a market. If your market's too saturated with this Honda CR-V LX, we'll actually push that to the top of your recommendations to say, there's actually too many of these in your marketplace and you might want to get rid of them. A real life example that happened here in Chicago actually happened with BMW 3 Series. And our VP of Operations, David, actually noticed one of the dealers in the area had purchased 65 BMW 3 Series within a week from different wholesale channels and stocked them on his lot. And immediately you could see just how long many of these vehicles, not just on his lot, but on everybody else's around him, were starting to stay because the supply was just so much bigger than the demand. We actually called a different BMW dealership in the area, told them about the situation, and recommended that he get out of some of the 3 Series and restock them with a different model. And he was actually really thankful for it. So this is, again, just one of the different variables that puts this ranking into our dealer-driven marketplace. And clicking on a vehicle that we recommend to get rid of, or you guys are looking to get rid of, actually goes through a pretty standard wholesale process. So we ask just basic questions about the condition of the vehicle. Are there any extras, any features that we need to know about? And then your price you're trying to get out of the car for. So as soon as you submit that, folks at DRIVIN actually get this, we have a VIN get triggered, and we have a team in-house that works with you as a dealership to help market that inventory. So if you use a fishing analogy, when you toss the lure into the lake, you're just kind of waiting for a fish to bite. What makes DRIVIN a little bit different is we actually take that bait and try to find the right fish. So if there is a dealer out there that vehicle is a good fit for. There's someone out there that needs that car because there's a shortage of that vehicle in his market. There's too many in yours, there's too few in his. We're going to find the dealer that makes a good fit for and hopefully pair you guys up. So DRIVIN actually takes ownership of that vehicle. We're not a broker, which is one piece that's actually different as well. So when you're looking to replace that vehicle you got rid of, again, there's a buy tab here. There's a way for dealership partners to look at vehicles we've either recommended, or you can search inventory for your own. And the difference is we're not actually just loading auction vehicles and wholesale vehicles. We're finding, again, other dealers that haven't quite pushed VINs through a wholesale channel yet, and we're working to find the right homes for them. So this inventory we have in the marketplace, a lot of it's going to be unique. It's not going to be things you see on online auction sites. It's going to be things that we've worked with dealer partners to acquire and that we're trying to find homes for. So the search process is very simple. It's very clean and easy to use, which is what we were hoping for. And again, at any given point, if you want to use the human element, we use our friend Natalie here as one of our account execs in-house. You can have real-time conversations on the phone, chat, or email to kind of pick through our inventory. I think we have about 1,900 vehicles on there ourselves right now. We haven't even launched Marketplace yet. So again, at any given point, you can actually come through, use the software tool, or use your account exec or AM and DRIVIN to find that optimal lot. And we help you create, we're your consultative partner that helps you create that optimal lot. So we covered a lot today, and that's basically it for the webinar presentation. I saw a few questions come through as we were clicking through, and I thank you guys for jumping through everything with me. We started out with biases, so hopefully you guys are aware of those, and if you catch yourself falling victim to one, hopefully some of the information you gained today will help you prevent doing that in the future. And then we talked about the data-driven approach, which is what DRIVIN's really known for. It's using data and analytics that we have inside here and complementing your experience and expertise within your dealership to really form that optimized used inventory. So I'll shut up now. I've been talking for a little over a half an hour and hand it over back to you.
John, we'll let you get a drink of water. How's that sound?
I know, I got a water bottle here. It looks delicious.
John, great presentation. I think one of the things that really came back to me was, a few years back, we had Billy Bean actually come to Driving Sales Executive Summit. And for all those who have seen the movie Moneyball, and for all those who haven't, please do. But there's one scene where there's the scouts are actually sitting in a room. They're talking about their different players, and every single one of their decisions is based off of their long-term experience. And one of the things that comes back that's really funny is they decide that they're not going to pick up a player because he has an ugly girlfriend. And so,
I remember that.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we run into this exact same situation where people have bias towards a certain vehicle based off of their own experience with that vehicle. For example, oh man, I'm not getting that car. I saw it broken down just today. But what we're really talking about here is that how do you move from that perception to really diving down and becoming a more scientific and analytic way of analyzing your inventory, making sure that it's the proper mix. We actually did have a few questions come in. I want to encourage, if you do have a question, please type that in right now. The first question is, which biases are most prevalent among car dealers?
Sure. The answer is it depends who you're talking to, but honestly, the folks that I've found that really do a good job of marrying this up don't fall into an overconfidence bias, which is pretty strong in the market. They actually take that and say, I know a lot, I've seen a lot happen, I understand the industry very well. You have a different way of thinking. Help me understand where you're coming from. I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from, and let's see if we can both learn from each other. And those have been the most productive relationships. So even if you have an overconfidence bias, all you need to do is be open-minded about ways to get better. So overconfident bias is probably the most prevalent I've seen, but it's also the one that if folks realize they have and they realize that there's ways to get better and there's other ways I can use data to strengthen my knowledge and position in the marketplace, it can actually be flipped from a negative to a very strong positive.
Interesting. Next question. On recency, I believe that's what they have here. There's a bit of spelling, which, by the way, I don't know how to spell recency either, so totally understand. On recency, if I got a car and made good spread on it, why shouldn't I try and get it again?
Yeah, so that gets back to the recency bias we talked about. And again, if you're flipping a car really quickly and you've made a good deal of money on it, or you thought it was just a big win and you're ready to repeat it, I would move forward with the plan that, yes, you're going to, unless you find a reason not to. So that was the example in the webinar where we're trying to find reasons why we wouldn't go down this path. And it starts with really quick data assessment. It's easy to see that if you originally purchased that car, marketed it, and sold it, let's say in 3 weeks, which is a big win, how much more of that inventory came into your market? Was when you bought it and marketed it, was there only maybe 10 or 12 and now there's 20? That would give you a pause. Or if someone else entered the marketplace and listed a few of the same ones at a very competitive price and similar features and equipment to you, again, you would have to look and say, do we want to go toe-to-toe with this? Are there enough buyers to purchase these cars? And again, use data just to make sure before you pull the trigger that nothing major has changed in the market, nothing major has changed with your customers.
Well, and I think it's kind of the old adage of, one raindrop does not a flood make, right?
Yeah,
is that
exactly.
turning one vehicle quick does not necessarily mean the next thing is going to have the same repeat effect. I mean, you may have just found the perfect buyer just for that one. So
exactly.
Next, I think this kind of goes in that same thing from that previous question, is that how do I define my target? Maybe I'll break this up into two questions here. There's actually two here. So let's start out with how do I define my target?
It's the example I've used before when I had a dealer partner really push me on this piece. He actually called in a bunch of his used sales folks off the floor that weren't helping customers at the time, and we sat around a kitchen table in the dealership, and I basically referred to everybody he brought in as the greatest sources of this information. And one guy he called out, this was one of his best salesmen. I said, think about who you sold the car to 2 weeks ago that was a big win. Did you empathize well? What did you guys talk about, and how did you use that information to help put him in the car and close the sale? And he was able to recall a lot of specific data points about that customer. The guy was a big outdoorsman. They traded hunting stories. They talked about the different types of SUVs and trucks and how they would be used, just using lifestyle examples. So we get back to behavioral and psychographic data. And as soon as we just broke down a real case example of what that salesperson was able to collect from the customer, log into his own brain, and use to close the deal, all we need to do now is put that on a software program. All we need to do is enter that into an Excel sheet or enter that into your CRM. So all those stories, the details that these sales guys get and the folks in F&I and even the folks in service department get, they're very fresh in their minds on the near term. But if you ask someone 14 months ago about a specific VIN they sold, maybe they can give you a couple details about that person, but not a whole lot of information. So as soon as you are in, get a win or get a loss, what traits did that customer have? And you kind of separate the wins and losses and say, on the losses, we're really not doing well with folks that have these types of traits. But on the wins, we see a lot of overlap with people that are into the outdoors. We might be able to have a position in the marketplace that gives us a lot of strength with a certain type of vehicle for outdoors fanatics or people that are hunting and fishing a lot. So you'll be able to see that data as it builds up over time, but it's important to get it out of the sales team's minds, out of the folks at the dealership's minds, and into an actual tool that you can reference. And I think the second part of your question was, for how long do you need to look at that?
Yeah.
Really, it's if you've been good at tracking it, I think 4 or 5 years is probably the most I would go into personally. If you want to go longer, that's great. Something with the laws of diminishing returns. But on the examples I've done with dealer partners that have given me DMS data before, we usually ask for 2 to 3 years if they have it. And the trends are usually pretty consistent unless you've done a major overhaul or change within your dealership to specifically target different buyers. So really, you want to accommodate seasonality and you want to accommodate any overhead turn on your sales team. But really the types of customers you attract and you market to and the purchase from you should be pretty consistent. So within a year or two, you should be able to solve that problem.
Well, and I really think that what you're talking about here, John, is really intelligent because, you look at, there's not just bias inside of our decisions on our own, but there's also just industry shifts as far as what type of vehicle people are looking at buying. And I was just actually looking at the type of vehicles people are buying this year versus last year, and there's such a shift towards, SUVs. The industry and like the Wall Street Journal is defining them as small trucks, but really it's the crossovers. It's the small SUVs that are really kind of winning the war right now. And so there's a combination of saying, not just, hey, this is what I sold today or sold yesterday, but where's the industry kind of shifting? I think you're making a great point here. And so what's kind of the first steps in your mind as far as like, okay, how do I take all this information? How do I kind of move out of my personal biases and kind of bring this data in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we talk about logging the data, I would never eliminate the human element to any data or analysis. So when you have customer information, when you're looking at the types of people that are coming in and buying from you and what they're buying, it's imperative to have folks in your dealership that can look at the data and say, does this make sense or does this not make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, why? And it's okay to have counterintuitive data. It's something that you may not have realized, but there's also some analyses and some data pulls that just become, subject to their own biases, so to speak. And just having a person look that over and say, I understand what's happening here. This is actually an anomaly and not the status quo for our data. It's a really great aspect to do. So collecting the data to a point that you think is enough to look at, like I said before, a year or two worth of retail sales data can definitely give you something to talk about. And going through as a team and saying, what groups do we see forming here? Even at a sales level, do some of my sales team members do a better job closing certain types of customers than others? There's actually a company in our building called Echo Logistics, which handles a lot of shipping and freight. And they actually have personality profiles for their internal folks as well as their customers and do very detailed data science work to pair up personalities that fit best together. So that's next level stuff. But even in a dealership, you're going to know your team really well. You're going to be able to look at the customers that come in and say, okay, we're really good at closing people that have A, B, and C traits. D, E, and F are kind of struggles. Is there anybody on my team that can handle those folks coming in? Or do we need to just focus on the folks that carry the A, B, and C traits? And that's more of a strategic discussion as opposed to a definitive answer.
Oh, and I think the lie of big data was all you needed was big data, right?
Right.
It really, if there's not a human to actually explain that, then you kind of lose that. So we do have one more question. Is that how do I know what people think of my brand?
Okay, yeah. So there is, I definitely see a lot coming through on the webinars and conferences about how to utilize social to build a brand and attract the right customers. Dealer reviews have been, a big talking point since probably 2010. I'm just guessing there, maybe a little bit earlier. So you're going to find, public domain records of what people think of your dealership fairly easily, but I know there's a lot of really progressive dealers out there that make it a point of emphasis to either survey or get direct feedback from a customer right at the point of sale. And I would really do it then, and then potentially follow up over some near-term time frame afterwards. So is it 15 days, 30 days later, now that you have your car, you've gone through the entire process with our dealership, what did we do well? What could we have done better? And I know that's a very big point of emphasis for dealerships out there. OEMs push it down as well. So direct feedback is always my preferred route. You could always do, if you're big into social and you have a good social brand out there, you can also watch what people say on Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff, and understand where your referrals are coming from.
Cool. Well, hey, John, thank you so much today. I really appreciate you taking some time with us. I know that DRIVIN's actually going to be joining us at the Driving Sales Executive Summit. We're really excited to have you guys down there with us.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be great. We were there last year. I spoke at the President's Club in Miami, and we love it, and we're definitely super amped up to get back.
Yeah, actually, John, I know one's going to be right up your alley. We actually have Julie Hoffman, who is the data and digital experience for MGM. She's going to be presenting, and I've actually talked to her about how she migrates her data and uses it to improve customer experience. So you'll be liking that one. It should be pretty interesting. I'm excited for it. So
awesome.
Thank you to everybody, but John in particular, thank you for taking some time today. I really appreciate your insights. So thank you.
No, thank you for having us. And again, like you said, thank you to everybody who dialed in or is watching after the fact. Hope it was interesting.
All right, this will end our webinar today, and everyone have a great day.